Has he shot anybody?
He fired a shot. I don't know if he shot or not. And he just choked me. And I'm afraid for my son and my baby. Please hurry, please.
Oh my God! Where are you at?
Victims of domestic violence, they're like a prisoner of war.
Officers have to understand that either you're our knight in shining armor or you're our worst nightmare.
The police are on their way, okay?
The question is, when do we change the culture and all stand up and say that violence against women is something we're not going to tolerate in policing?
How can I help you?
She won't die.
Who won't die?
My wife.
What's wrong with your wife?
Well, I tried to strangle her about 4 different ways. She won't die.
Why are you trying to kill her?
Because I don't like her.
This is truly the engine and the juice that runs this crime day in and day out, is someone's belief that they have every bit of control over a family and their everyday movement and their life.
When I met my husband, he was so charming. As soon as I married him, his whole disposition changed with me. Immediately, I became owned.
I mean, manipulation is obviously a tactic that they use, but when you're in it, it's so hard to see.
And this is the pattern of an abuser. They twist your life.
90% plus of cases involving serious, severe domestic violence, you're going to see a female victim.
Women are the #1 target, and most perpetrators are male. However, there is a significant population of LGBTQ intimate partner violence.
A series of behaviors typically emerge. One is the complete domination over money, forced sex, extreme jealousy and obsession. If I can't have you, nobody's going to have you. Threats to kill.
What's key here is to remember that this is a relationship that evolves over time. This is not just the incident that you are in as a police officer.
I want to talk about frustrations specific to intimate partner violence or domestic violence.
Going to the same address and no signs of bruises or anything like that. They're abusing the system and get the other one locked up.
Okay, all right, overuse the system maybe.
They called you there obviously, and then they don't want to cooperate. They don't want to maybe give you statements, or they don't want you to arrest their boyfriend or husband. It's more or less that you're doing them a disservice by taking that person to jail.
Okay, all right, and it's frustrating, right?
The victim goes right back to the person, and it's almost like they're setting the person up for failure. It's just a cycle, it just keeps going.
Could you imagine sitting around having a cup of coffee at the end of the detail and have an officer say, you know, these hostage situations, they're a waste of our time. I'm tired of going back to them again. I really don't want to answer them. We wouldn't say that about those crimes, but for some reason we say it about these crimes, which means we're focusing often on what the victim is doing.
Hello? Come on down here. Here, come here. Come here. What's going on?
I find a lot of times that it's hard to find anybody at the scene that's really just wide open and ready to talk to us and let us know exactly what's happening. It just doesn't happen that much.
Where's he at?
He ran that way.
Okay.
There's an explanation why a victim doesn't want to cooperate, because victims will often tell you when bad things happen to him, worse things happen to me.
And I had to promise I would never call the police again. Like swear, he couldn't trust me. So then to have the police come, he was shocked. And my ex stood back into the hallway so that you couldn't see him from the front door, and he was like, and all of that. And I was really scared because he's completely capable of doing that.
the officer that thinks that she's refusing my help or that she's not taking the course of action that we think is the most appropriate, think again, because it may not be the most appropriate for her, and statistically, arresting him is no guarantee that she will survive. Issuing an order of protection is no guarantee that she will survive.
He's a little out of control, but please don't send anybody. We're just real concerned about your welfare. Okay? Yeah. And we are going to ask an officer to come by. No. Okay, why are you concerned about an officer coming by? Please don't.
It's just the most terrifying moment. You're so scared of both people at that time. But also, you don't really want them to take your abuser, usually. You just want the abuse to stop.
But it's not the first time.
She's not only thinking about herself, she's thinking about her kids. She's thinking about, where am I going to go? Are they going to take my kids from me? Am I going to get arrested? If he gets arrested, how are we going to make it without his financial support? It's this perfect storm of things that she has to think about, all in a matter of seconds. And so sometimes by the time a law enforcement officer responds to the scene, she may have changed her mind. She's already recanting. She's already minimizing. And that's a survival strategy.
I remember a lot about the police. Every chance I got, I would call. No one asked about the history. How many times had it occurred? Had he ever threatened to kill her before? We were never asked those questions.
This yellow house. This is where my mother was murdered.
There's a lot we have in common with domestic violence victims, and we should understand that. Who stays on the job facing certain danger, maybe death? It's police officers. We got more in common with victims of domestic violence than we know, because they live in danger every day. They live with certain assault and maybe death.
And it was in the bedroom right above, to your left, right there.
I heard pow, 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 pow. And I dialed 911. And I told them that my dad had shot my mom. What stuck with me was the officers coming to the house. Or the officers in the room while she was still there. They joked. Everything they said will stay with me forever.
We don't want to do more damage. We're here to help people. If you can do it right, first time, second time, third time, you might be saving yourself a homicide case a little later down the road.
Because there was no documented history, they offered him a plea bargain, so he would only serve 18 months. When the judge asked him if he had something he wanted to say, his statement was, I just want to hurry up and get my time done so I could get back home to my family.
When you talk to the offender, if they are truly a domestic violence offender, you're not just talking to one generation of offenders, you're talking to generations of offenders who have, justified using male privilege and entitlement to control their family.
It's easy to see the offender who's overtly resisting, who's telling a law enforcement officer to go forth and multiply or something. But the more calculating, manipulative offender, who may be more sociopathic potentially, may be very much in control, may be wanting to depict the victim as histrionic, neurotic, dishonest.
I'm just trying to figure out what's going on here. You're not telling me much, and she's talking to me.
Nothing happened. She's vindictive. I didn't even know she was on there
I didn't even believe she was on the phone with you.
They're doing a lot of fishing. They're throwing up all kinds of things and seeing what's going to stick. They're very good at reading us, just like we try to read them. And they become skilled in staying out of handcuffs.
You know, I don't want to express what my wife has done to me. I mean,
The question is, when do we change the culture and all stand up and say, and then we're going to do a better job of it, and we're going to investigate the right way, we're going to prosecute, we're going to hold offenders accountable.
There's much more that's evidence supporting her claims, substantiate what she's saying. So right now you're under arrest, all right? 1 second.
That's when we'll start to see the culture start to change around violence against women in American policing.
This has been going on forever and ever. Could you just send the police, please?
Okay, we're gonna be there. Who's taking your baby?
No. Oh.
This is not easy.
Stay there, stay there. I'm coming.
What's easy is for me to sit here and to tell officers exactly what they need to do. I know how hard these cases are.
I need cuffs. Post Falls, we have one male detained. I don't know, she's right over there, contact her.
Okay, she's bleeding from the face.
Most crime that law enforcement responds to are incident-based. It's a single occurrence, whereas when we look at domestic violence, it's a course of conduct. It's multiple incidents over often extended periods of time.
When a victim calls the police, it may have been the 6th or 7th incident.
Which is really important because I think that when law enforcement come and they see that there's been a physical altercation, there's usually been this whole history of things that have happened before then that don't always rise to criminal behavior, but tell the full story of how powerless she is in the context of the relationship.
An abuser found my mother, and it was my stepfather. And it was emotional, it was psychological, it was really physical, near-death experiences over and over again over a 10-year period. The officer that came to my house stood on our front porch, and I heard him tell my mother, if we come out here one more time, you're going to jail. And my mother just shook. I mean, and it's one thing for a parent to hold a trembling child, it's a whole other thing for a child to hold a trembling parent. And I never forgot it.
The victim of abuse, who may have used a level of violence in defending herself, who now gets arrested, now what do they think of the justice system as far as being a system of help and a system that they can turn to? And what'll happen is they simply won't.
If you had a cheat sheet in your pocket, here's what you want to do. You want to identify the offender, you want to identify the victim, you want to locate the offender, you want to document your evidence, and you want to find your probable cause.
Do not move, all right?
Yeah, it's okay for her to hit me in the face, right?
We'll get this all figured out in just a minute, all right?
Fuck that.
I like to call this bully determination. Determine in the relationship who's the bully, and you'll have your predominant aggressor.
I hit my wife. I love her more than anything. I shouldn't have hit her.
I know you love her.
I shouldn't have hit her. I shouldn't have hit her.
Was it out of the heat of the moment? I mean, was it a reaction?
It was out of the heat of the moment. After she hit me in the face, I punched her in the face, but my face looks a lot less worse than her face does.
One of the encounters we'll have would be with the perpetrator who plays off as the victim.
She punched me in the face, and then she told Becca to call the cops.
Okay.
I told Becca not to call the cops because it wasn't worth her going to jail.
We've got to be careful to work through that we don't automatically buy the story of one over the other.
You've got to look at the history. You've got to look at what the neighbors have said. You've got to look at the injuries. You've got to look at what the past reports have told you. You've got to look at the behavior of the victim. You've got to look at the behavior of the offender.
She said she tripped over this. There's the phone that's destroyed. Yeah, it looks like it's been smashed with a hammer.
You can't do this in 5 or 10 minutes. This takes time. It takes an investment.
We need to put just as much into a domestic violence call as we do a traffic accident investigation.
I still don't know the whole story. I just got his story, so I don't know what your side is.
I'll talk to you.
Okay, well, you want to go. I just want to make sure the kiddos don't have to hear it, and somewhere where you're comfortable.
They're really approaching it as a conversation as opposed to an investigation where you have to have her standing, you have to have her in a certain room, you have to, do this, but to give her a little bit of autonomy and choice about how this is going to happen is huge.
Just let them know that you're concerned about their safety. The most important thing, I'm concerned about your safety.
My kids have never seen anything like this in their life.
Okay, and they shouldn't. You shouldn't have gone through this, ever.
And you say that sincerely, directly, eyeball to eyeball to that person so that they know. Because the victim is so afraid to tell you what's going on that they will not share with you.
What's going to get at that kind of thing is a conversation, is rapport building, is warmth, is understanding, is time.
How many times would you say over the last 2 years?
A lot.
Can you give me a number, just a guesstimate?
Probably 12.
Have you ever reported it?
Never.
Why not?
It's very scary. He takes my phone. Threatens me a lot.
He always takes your phone when you
Yeah.
drink? Okay, and then he threatens you?
Yeah.
What does he say?
I'll kill you. I'll kill your kid.
If you call the police?
Yeah.
And when we look at domestic violence, we know that often there are behaviors that have meaning only between that victim and offender. And so anybody from the outside will see something and will think it's benign or harmless, but to that victim, it absolutely can be terrifying and threatening.
He used to get a look. Before things got physical, he would get a look. And you can't describe it. And that's the thing that's really hard to explain to the police too when they're escalating. Well, he got a look. How do you explain that?
Don't be judge and jury in that moment. Just believe her. Let the process take care of itself. One of the most disheartening and frustrating things for people in crisis, particularly victims of domestic violence, sexual violence, and stalking, is feeling that you have to prove the case in the instant of crisis, when that is not what the process is supposed to be about. You're supposed to get help.
Where did, in your face? Okay. All right, I can see your lips a little bloody. And then he said he smothered you with the pillow? Was he sitting on top of you when he did that?
He got the pillow over my face and he couldn't breathe.
Okay.
You're not going to have the perfect cookie-cutter victim.
And then what happened?
This victim may be all over the place on her story. This victim may not make a lot of sense because, you know what, this is something pretty traumatic that just happened to this person. And that's the way victim trauma plays out.
As a matter of fact, when she doesn't cooperate, that's evidence. When we see trauma in her, that's evidence. When we see her say, don't take him to jail, that's evidence. When we see the kid say, Daddy didn't do anything to Mommy, that's evidence, because I can get on the stand now and testify that what most often happens in a domestic violence case is the victims are so controlled, they do things completely opposite of other crime victims.
Judge, charge of domestic violence, there's a protection order filed, no victim present?
There is a victim present, Your Honor. She asked to remain outside. She is fearful to come in.
In a courtroom setting, a victim in many instances might, whether the defendant has said anything or not, still be intimidated and be afraid to say anything other than, I just want it to go away.
If we stop at just the arrest, you're under arrest for, and we don't understand how to get to the conviction, we lose. Who do we blame? Do we blame ourselves? Who do we blame? Daggone prosecutors. Damn, they suck. Damn, did they get their law degree at? Right? Hell yeah, we do.
I don't know what the emotions were like. I don't know how distressed or calm people were. Only the officer can paint a picture for me of how it was when they arrived. But writing down specifically what they say versus she described an assault, I saw visible injuries. Statements like, I am afraid of suspect. specific quotes about her fears, her current emotional state, that can be admitted into evidence.
I'm sorry you had to go through this, okay? And it doesn't matter if you recanted, okay? It still happened, okay? It still happened, and we understand why people recant sometimes.
The more evidence that you can put in front of the court, the more that you can allow the court to see what you see.
Lady did not wish to prosecute at the scene, and the detective signed the complaint. I did.
The more likely it is that the emphasis is going to be removed from just the statements of the victim, and it's going to focus on the totality of the circumstances that surround the event.
This case belongs to the city of Cleveland, not to the alleged victim.
Abusers and batterers can be incredibly creative and incredibly manipulative. And so when we think about the types of behaviors they engage in, it could be really anything, and in some cases, everything.
So often domestic violence cases or incidents involve some level of financial abuse. And that can range from using their credit cards or ruining their credit to putting things in their wives' or their girlfriends' names that they're unaware of. That makes it really hard to separate. Pet abuse is a huge one that we always look for. I did have a case where he killed her dog, snapped its neck in front of her and said, "This is what I'll do to you next time."
Batterers and abusers often engage in stalking behaviors. And when we have that combination of physical abuse and stalking, the risk of lethality for those victims goes up dramatically.
I had emails, I had text messages, I had calls, I had emails from different email addresses. He would send me videos, he would send me pictures, it was constant. It was constant.
Can't give me an answer, Nina? Just give me an answer, please. Scared, terrified. You don't deserve to be hit on and choked and all that. You would rather have me keep calling than to give me an answer, Nina?
Individually, in most cases, those acts are not criminal acts. But when you see them together as part of that course of conduct, then we can start looking at them as stalking behavior.
At least half the time, you're going to also have sexual assault going on in that same relationship. If kids are in that home, at least half the time, they're also being physically or sexually abused. If I don't ask, it's not going to be volunteered.
You're really talking about relationship and building trust, and you want me to tell you the most intimate details of my life that are important because they may save my life if I tell you. But it's very hard to tell to a stranger.
You're laying on your back?
I'm laying on my back.
Okay.
Like both hands on my throat, and he's like lifting his knee up to put it on my neck. And then he started mimicking me when I was screaming.
Take your time if you need to.
The police officer, he just checked in with me constantly. We're eye level. He had his whole body turned towards me. His demeanor, his expressions, he just seemed genuinely sorry at what I had gone through. And I don't know. After all that, to have a grown man be nice, I don't know, it mattered. It was helpful.
On average, it takes a victim approximately 7 times to separate before they completely separate from that relationship.
When you finally get this as a police officer, it's like you've lifted a veil from your face and you can finally see this crime for what it really is. Leaving a violent relationship is not an event, it's a process.
Every little step, every positive response that victim might have with law enforcement can further empower them to leave that relationship.
You have to have patience, and you have to be caring, and you have to provide some comfort to that person. How would you want your family member to be cared for if another officer was responding there? And it's just that simple. You have to think about it as if this is happening to you or to someone that you love.
You shouldn't have gone through this, ever.
problem? This is the police department. What's the problem?
The very moment the radio dispatch comes in and the dispatcher says, domestic violence call, something happens to you as an officer.
Who has a gun to your head?
You start to think about your own survival.
Every scene is different.
I'll be making a quick stop at Clay Ave.
For the police officer who is approaching that front door, it's the unknown.
The offender comes in all kinds of flavors. From walking out, to sticking their hand out and shaking hands with you like they're a real estate agent when you pull on the scene, to someone who's standing on the front porch waiting for you to get there so they can tell you you can't come in my house, threatening you with a lawsuit and saying they're going to have your badge, or somebody that's going to meet you with a gun or a knife.
You mind if I just pat down your pockets real quick? You don't have anything in here? No. Okay. Nothing in here? No, this might smoke. Okay.
We have buried U.S. police officers in this country for over 300 years, killed answering calls, where there's a violent man there often abusing their family. This should be the very best thing we do, because all the things that an offender will do to their family is what they'll do to a responding police officer.
There's a female party that's on the line, and I can hear the men in the background.
It's very important to have as much information as possible before rolling up to the scene of that domestic violence. Information like, have we been here before? Have there been arrests here before? If there's been arrests, who are the occupants? Are the occupants wanted? Is there any warrants for those individuals? Is there any mental health information that our officers need to know?
It's amazing officers don't get hurt more often than they do. You know, people are emotional, the police are in their house. Almost always there's substance abuse issues there, some type of intoxication, or somebody's drunk, high. You know, really teamwork is probably the biggest key to safety when we're responding to these kind of calls. The more people we have, the safer we're going to be.
That's a struggle that you have in small communities. You may not have backup for anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes. You run into issues of radio contact.
Talking from a landline.
You get out of cell phone contact. Some roads dead end. Yeah, I'm not going to try this. If I go in with an attitude and I go in being abrasive and rash and pushy when I first get there, well, then that's probably not going to turn out real well for me when the next officer is not coming for 15 minutes.
It's not unusual to see about a third of your calls are repeat calls. And if you get a lot of repeat calls, that often means someone's using more violence in a shorter period of time.
I need backup to expedite. I've got a female being dragged. My car just got hit.
One more time.
Post Falls 1138. We're northbound William. A female is being dragged.
I have actually talked to officers who told me, I got familiar. I knew the guy. I'd been there 3 or 4 times. I decided to pull in the driveway. I thought, I won't hit the end of the street. I'll wave my back off. I don't need them. I think I know him. And I ended up having to shoot this man. I've had officers tell me that on domestic violence calls, because you think you know someone, and again, what you don't know is the dynamic of that family at that moment when that victim called the police.
Hey, what's your dad doing? He's killing my mom. With what, honey? With what? A gun.
When you talk about victim safety, you've got to talk about your own safety as well. You can't separate the two. Which means you've got to ask the victim questions you might not have asked in the past, like, has he ever threatened you or your children with a gun? Do you think he might try to kill you? Has he ever assaulted you while you were pregnant? Has he ever strangled you? Is he ever forced to do something of a sexual nature against your will you didn't want to do? I mean, these are questions that may not have relevance to the very moment that you were there about the assault, but the context is critical.
We should always assume that there might be some type of weapon. Add alcohol and drugs, and then you have a volatile mix.
Oh my gosh! Where are you at?
If this individual seems to be dangerous, we need to get those guns out of their hands.
If you don't pick up on some of those things, and you don't make an arrest, or you don't at least provide services for that victim, the next time your fellow officer goes back, the call may be much more serious. Your fellow officer may be under greater threat of either violence or homicide.
All right, here we go. That situation is still ongoing. Has a DVPO come down?
That's the one we discussed last night about the, where she's staying at. So when y'all serve him, that's got child custody in it as well.
If you're offering any kind of service, a protection to a victim of domestic violence, you're now a problem for the offender.
Be safe. Just need to pay attention to what goes on in your surroundings and tactically aware.
If we just assume that these men kill out of a sense of power and control over women, we miss the complexity, because often they kill when their power is ebbing, and often they kill when they feel they're not in control.
Usually these folks are really emotional. A lot of times this is the first notice that things are serious. So they'll do what they can do to try to avoid service.
My mileage is 675, and I have other units here with me serving.
And this is what times leads to officer injuries, officer deaths, because when they start losing control, we start gaining control. And we have to gain control in policing because we're responsible for your safety.
Folks who violate protection orders are some of the scariest people that I think that I have to deal with.
All rise, please.
If he's out to get you, he's out to get you, and he doesn't care about that order of protection. That's just a piece of paper to him, you know, until you're cut up or beat up, and then somebody shows up to help you.
The threat before this threat is what's worrying me, though.
What was that threat?
That if I ever was to get another protection order against him, that he was going to make it worth it.
If you've got protection order violation, if you've got a bail condition violation, if you've got someone who's thumbing their nose at a sanction that a court's levied on them because of domestic violence, that's a high indicator before you even arrive on the scene.
He told me that he would kill me and hide the body and act surprised when the police came. He had told me before that the police were nobody special, and he didn't have any problem standing up to them.
Domestic violence offenders coerce and threaten, intimidate victims. Why do we think that offender wouldn't use those same tactics on a responding officer? Let me isolate the officer. Let me intimidate the officer. Let me coerce the officer. Let me threaten the officer. Let me assault the officer. Let me use my kids against the officer. Let me use my wife against the officer. Please don't take him to jail. Don't do this. We'll lose our paycheck. Let me use everything that I use to keep my family under control, to controlling that officer's response as well. If it works on one, try it on another.
Is someone there trying to call for the police or an ambulance?
No, that was an accident.
No, it wasn't an accident. Get over here.
It was, sir.
It wasn't an accident.
Sir.
So what exactly is the problem there?
I have no idea.
Get over here.
The bottom line is, you've got to take each and every domestic violence call serious. You can't lower your guard. You can't minimize. If you minimize, you'll get hurt or the victim will get hurt. And this is something that no officer wants.
I'll be making a quick stop at Clay Ave.
These cases are so complex and so dynamic that no one individual, no one agency, no one organization can handle everything that's associated with these cases. It takes partnerships.
Todd Martinet, I'm a detective with the Flagstaff Police Department.
Stacy Krieger, I'm with the County Attorney's Office and I specialize in felony prosecution.
Pam Turner, forensic nurse with NACASA.
Cece Mitchell, Sharon Manor, domestic violence shelter, transitional housing. We are full.
Just really need to start one individual at a time if you haven't traveled this path yet. And before you know it, you'll be meeting on a regular basis and you'll know one another on a first name basis.
The key here is that the multidisciplinary, multi-agency feel to community intervention is that we learn a lot from each other about how to do things. The first responder learns how compromised the Child Protective Service worker is. They learn how the prosecutor needs certain elements of the offense written down and clearly articulated in a certain way in order to effect a prosecution.
One of the new factors that's required is that they have to consider a lethality assessment if one was conducted as part of a determination for bond. So that makes a big difference for their considerations.
We're not here to shame or blame any agency for anything. We're just trying to evolve and fix our system.
Are we putting them at risk? Are we going to put them in harm's way? So we want to make sure that we do this correctly, privately, and that we have good resources to refer them to.
We also seek for small accomplishments, just kind of on top of each other, because it's the little changes that make the biggest impact.
Before, we would serve the order of protection and no one would ever hear about it again. Now we're capturing the plaintiff's information, phone numbers and all that stuff. So now officers serve it, they have that sheet, they call the plaintiff and let that plaintiff know. Just want to let you know, hey, we served this order of protection, it's now in effect.
It's incredible. They call me and they say, they served it, and he called me back. I was like, wow, and I was just shocked. It was fantastic, and it's been fantastic. Thank you.
The community has to work together and educate one another about what the needs are of the victim and then also understand what the obstacles are. Is it that she can't get to court that day? Is it the prosecutor has to continue this case so we can get her to court? Is it that she needs financial assistance from the domestic violence program? Does she need transitional housing?
Okay, and there's resources in there. Please, please, please take advantage of some of those, okay? We have 2 victim advocates that are going to be with you side by side every step of the way, okay? They're there to provide any kind of assistance that you need, okay? And they do a fantastic job.
They may need food. They may need clothing, they may need shelter, they may need transportation, counseling services, medical care. There's a laundry list of needs. Often they've left home without anything, including a cell phone. So sometimes they need an extra outfit for the kids, sometimes they need a toothbrush, they need something for a couple of meals. So whatever they need, if we don't have it here, we try to procure it.
Then sometimes it can fit better in there. I love advocates. I think every officer should use their advocates.
All this hot air in here.
Oh, yeah.
After I got in, huh? Is that what you're trying to say? There's no way that I could do what they do. And that's very important. And the same with prosecutors. There has to be a mutual respect. It takes a law enforcement officer and a prosecutor and an advocate that can leave their egos outside the door and understand that everybody has a responsibility and a role that's meaningful to the survivor.
You can't address the whole, right? I mean, that's why we have coordinated community responses. That's why we've got the EMTs and the paramedics and the healthcare providers and law enforcement and prosecutors and judges and juries and advocates. I mean, it's going to take all of us to help even just one person.
You're told you're old, you're ugly, you're fat, you're this. I just had all I could take, and I filed for divorce.
When she leaves is the most dangerous time. And so even though an officer may say, this is what you have to do, this is going to be in your best interest, it's also the most dangerous play for her at that time.
June 5th, 2011 is the day I took my 2.5-hour beating. That's the day he used the box cutter on Lucy. I had Lucy on my lap, and he asked me again to stop the divorce, and he started crying. I still don't know what he hit me with. When I come to, I could see Lucy, and she was covered in blood. And I could hear him cussing her. Shut that shit up or I'll kill you too. And I made it to the road. I couldn't see, but I could feel the road under my feet.
And all we knew was that someone had been beaten up really bad and that she was at the local gas station.
This is a small community. I've known Tony since he maybe 7, 8 years old. He didn't know who I was. He had no clue who I was. I'm glad you're the one that went to the house and got Lucy. I know that when you got her, she was okay.
That's who the survivor's going to remember. They're going to remember that face, that person that came to the rescue.
I knew we had to get that child.
And so they're going to want to get answers and be able to contact that person. The officers don't have time because the detectives had called me and asked me, could I meet you at the courthouse the next day?
Without the advocate team, I couldn't have done it. I've never been through anything like this in my life. I had no clue what I was doing. I would literally write 2 or 3 lines and throw up my trash can. And Sarah stayed right there through it all.
The sooner that somebody can grab that victim's hand and say, I'm going to be holding your hand from point A to point Z. Wherever you go and you want me there, I'm going to be there with you. There's so much relief in that.
Come here. Mama, turn around this. Where's your scar?
It's right here.
Right there? It's laying down good, isn't it? Sarah put me in touch with everybody that I needed to be in touch with. Easy. She connected me to the service that pays for my hospital bills. There's no way I could have paid those. Vine notifies me of his projected parole dates. We would get one thing completed and she'd say, okay, this is our next step.
Sometimes advocates can get information from survivors that officers weren't able to get because we develop a longer-term relationship. We see them more often. We can delve into topics in a relaxed atmosphere.
I can still hear his voice. I can still see Lucy. Your victim advocate doesn't judge you. They sit and listen to you so that you can heal. And I can still hear her crying. And when I hear that...
I in law enforcement in the criminal justice system has to work with all of the other service providers so the road is clear and compact. There's no gaps. When the victim says, I'm ready to leave, we are ready for you when you're ready to leave.
It's just kind of a good feeling for me to know that us as first responders, we can get that ball rolling.
If we're to really build our communities, we've got to make it a real community. We as officers have to be a part of that community and want to be a part of that community.
You need everybody at the table. Members of faith, people within the criminal justice system, outside the criminal justice system. You need everyone if you're going to make a difference with this.
I just want to let you know and to let Officer Best know, you guys just will never know how much I appreciate you, Tony.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
I'm at a very good point in my life. I have a successful career. I have a man that just thinks the world of me.
Are you making cookies?
My grandchildren, my daughter, my life is good.
Dr. Peterson does that to me, loves it.
Well, listen, tell your dad hi for me. I'll have to find time to run up and sing. Treat your victim like they're your family. All right, Tony. Bye. That's your family, but for the grace of God, that's one of your family members standing there. Treat them like they're your family.